Okay, so today we're talking about Chapter 22, which is Descent with Modification or Natural Selection. I know that Liz also has this chapter, but it'll be good to hear the same information explained in two different ways, so let's get into it. So there are three main points in this chapter. 1. The Darwinian Revolution challenged traditional views of a young Earth inhabited by unchanging species. 2. Descent with Modification by Natural Selection explains the adaptations of organisms and the unity and diversity of life. And 3. Evolution is supported by an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence. So this traditional view of a young Earth inhabited by unchanging species was supported by a lot of major scientists in its day, and this view is called creationism. It's the whole religious viewpoint that Inherit the Wind was based on. Basically, it says God creates every species and places it on Earth in its most perfect, final form. This was supported by Cuvier, who explained the fossil record and all these dead, changing, clearly evolving animals by a theory called catastrophism. It said that God would place animals on the Earth in their final forms and then wipe them out in a huge catastrophe when he got tired of them. And then he'd place new animals on Earth in their place. Now, another incorrect theory that fueled creationism and opposed evolution was Jean-Baptiste Lamarck's theory of acquired characteristics, which said that organisms could pass characteristics they acquired during their life, like bigger muscles, onto their offspring, because scientists hadn't discovered genetics yet. But there were a lot of scientists whose theories formed the basis for Darwin's theory of natural selection. For example, James Hutton believed in gradualism, that the Earth was slowly and imperceptibly changing over time. This can obviously be applied to natural selection by saying that the theory of gradualism applies to living organisms as well as the Earth itself. And Charles Lyell believed that the Earth was very old, which was interesting because the Bible was the chief authority on knowledge of any kind at the time, and it said that the Earth was only 7,000 years old. Lyell also developed the theory of uniformitarianism, which stated that the processes occurring now on Earth are similar to the ones occurring in the past. Basically, the formula for evolution. And Thomas Malthus's theory was that competition for limited resources means that only some of the population can survive. Now, I think this was written about an overpopulation scare in Britain, but it works in biology too, to say that due to competition for limited resources, only the strongest group in a population has access to those resources and can survive. Okay, so before we actually start talking about natural selection, here's a brief history on Charles Darwin. He had a remarkably unspectacular young life, was pretty rich, and had zero idea what he wanted to do with his life. His family connections landed him a gig as the captain's companion on the HMS Beagle, a ship that was circumnavigating the world over the course of 5 years when Darwin was in his mid-20s. He became the ship's naturalist, and as y'all know, he conducted his most famous research on the Galapagos Islands off the coast of South America. He developed his theory of evolution through natural selection, and then he procrastinated for 20 years while he lived his life, got married, had kids, and never published anything. Then a man named Alfred Russel Wallace had the same theory of natural selection, and Darwin panicked. He wrote a quick paper so he could get credit for his theory, and he finally published it. Later, he wrote a book called The Origin of Species, and the rest is history. Now onto the actual theory of natural selection and Darwin's research on the Galapagos Islands. He observed many examples of adaptations, which are inherited characteristics of an organism that enhance its survival and reproduction in specific environments. And this is the research that gave him his theory of natural selection. So natural selection is survival of the fittest. It's a process in which individuals that have certain inherited traits tend to survive and reproduce at higher rates than other individuals because of those traits. And there are 4 main parts of natural selection. First, there's an overproduction of offspring, so there are too many babies for the environment to support all of their survivals. Then there's variation among individuals. For example, some birds have big, strong beaks, and some birds have little, long beaks. Then there's competition for limited resources, so the bird with the beak shape best suited to them finding their food source is going to survive and eat all of the limited food. The birds with the other beak shape will die because they didn't get the food, and the birds with the good beak will survive to reproduce. The good beak genes will accumulate in the population, and the species will evolve. Now, for example, Darwin studied Galapagos finches and Galapagos tortoises. For the finches, he noticed that in each area of the island, the finches had beaks which were best suited for the food source on that part of the island. The birds who ate insects had long, skinny beaks so they could get the bugs out of holes in trees. The birds who ate nuts had strong, thick beaks to crack them, and so on and so forth. That was an example of natural selection in action. The birds evolved traits that would best help them survive in their environment until they could reproduce. The same thing happened with the tortoises. They evolved shells that were the best shape for the wetness or dryness of their habitat so they could survive to reproduce and pass on their traits to their offspring. And all of this is supported by an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence. I'm pretty sure there's another chapter just about evidence for evolution, and at least there's another Prezi on Blackboard, so we're just going to talk about the main two. Homology, and the fact that we can see natural selection happening around us every day. A good example of this is drug-resistant bacteria, and scientists see this every time they introduce an antibiotic that kills all of a certain strain of this bacteria. As you can see in this graphic on the bottom, there's one tiny mutated cell that survives the antibiotic, and since it survives, it passes on its traits to its offspring when it reproduces. Since that strain doesn't die, it accumulates in the population, and suddenly the antibiotic doesn't work, and the entire strain is resistant to the drug. The same thing happens with insects and pesticides. Once one insect mutates and can survive a certain pesticide, the other bugs die and the resistant bug's gene accumulates until the entire population is pesticide resistant. Livestock breeding works the same way, but is artificial selection, where humans choose which traits are desirable and have the organisms with those traits reproduce. But it works the same way as natural selection. So the fact that we can actually see natural selection happening in front of us in all these different aspects is a pretty good indication that it does exist and that it does work. Another piece of evidence supporting natural selection is homology, or similarity resulting from common ancestry. Homologous structures have similar structure and similar development, but they have a different function. It's evidence of a close evolutionary relationship between organisms and indicates a recent common ancestor. So if you look at the picture on the top, you can see that a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat all had a common ancestor once and evolved to fit their respective environments, because each forearm is made out of the same bones and has a similar structure, but has a different function best suited for its environment. The whale forearm is best suited for swimming, the bat for flying, and so forth. Another example of a homologous structure would be chicken and T-Rex arms. Since the chicken evolved from the dinosaur, it has a similar arm structure, but they're used for different functions. A chicken flies with its forearm, and a T-Rex does whatever a T-Rex does, based off what they need to be able to do in their environment. It's just another example of natural selection in action. So this is natural selection and descent with modification, and I hope y'all liked it. Good luck studying, and good luck on the midterm. Ask me if you have any questions about this. Bye.